Hi, it's Wendy Passmore here. And over the past number of months, I guess almost a year, I've been putting together my story through, I guess it's a weekly gathering that we'd write our memoirs. And I've called it Musings from My Life's Journey. So, what I thought I would do is I would just, someone asked if I could put it on audio because she's not a great reader. So, I thought what I would do is just start to read it, maybe a couple stories in each segment, and slowly go through the book and put it on audio here. So, my first one is called The Beginnings. So, here goes. Richard Rohr, in his teachings, often refers to the need of a safe container as part of our development. When I think of Applewood Acres, the suburb just west of Toronto, that image comes to mind. For post war couples in the 1950s, it presented itself as a safe, contained community to raise a family. Everyone was the same: white folk with aspirations to create homes, comfortable middle class incomes, and traditional gender role values. Within a stone's throw from our house was the public school where I went, which was embedded in a lovely park with swings, a tennis court, a baseball diamond, in the winter a skating rink, and most importantly to me, a swimming pool. For someone drawn to sports, this was indeed a haven of possibilities. As junior high approached, we had to venture further afield. In today's world, it would have necessitated a bus, but back then the 2-mile hike was a daily unquestioned expectation. For 7 years, I made the trek through the neighborhood, over the footbridge which crossed Queen Elizabeth Way, and down the road, first to the junior high, followed by the senior high school. Often it was more of a run in the morning rather than a stroll, as we, my walking to school companion, and I, more often than not miscalculated the needed time. Lasting friendships were formed, extracurricular activities were engaged in, and overall my school experience was a very good one, filled with a great social life and activities. But for the most, growing up in this milieu, I found friends, fun, sports, and managed a high school graduation. But eventually something began to stir in my soul. A discontent, I remember, looking out of my bedroom window in grade 12, saying to myself, this might work for my family, but it doesn't work for me. Restlessness ensued, and the moment I completed my schooling, I was gone. A teary-eyed mother said goodbye to her 18-year-old daughter as she stepped out of the Applewood Acres box onto a flight to the West Coast, and the adventure began. I realize in retrospect that as much as I appreciate the gift my parents gave of home and provision, there was much that was missing in my childhood and adolescent formation. My mum knew it as she grew up close to the subway in the West End of Toronto. Diversity, interesting shops, the buzz of city life, or perhaps having a cottage to experience nature was among the missing parts. Perhaps my search then began for the more. So, number 2, a profound life experience. From middle-class suburbia to Long Lac First Nations, with a stop at Trent University for Native Studies in between. There is a mystery as to why the First Nations peoples have always captivated my attention. The 20-hour train ride north enabled a transition between two worlds. Stepping into this Ojibwe world, I was met with warmth and open arms. I was naive at 21, rather unevolved in my inner world, and open to the experience that lay before me. The Muckaday family embraced me as one of their own, including me in their regular camping expeditions in the bush. Fried bannock on the open fire, potatoes warming in the hot coals, and fresh fish frying in the open pan were among the culinary delights. Frances included me in her winter camping, where she made sure I had the necessary mucklucks for snowshoeing to snare rabbits. Gertie, one of my closest pals, about my age, lived next door, so we had daily visits over tea, and she labored to teach me how to make bannock, which I love to this day. Gertie continues to remain a close friend. The welcome and openness to my presence in their community enabled my felt experience of their pain, their unresolved trauma, and their being lost. I am reliving the memories of this time these many years later from the lens of the recent truth and reconciliation efforts and the discovery of the many graves at residential schools. I have remained friends with my closest connections from that time and have thus been able to talk about their pain and trauma from residential schools, all of whom share the experience. It seems that the first truth and reconciliation efforts and then the revelation of the children's graves enabled the lid to come off of the hidden stories of abuse and trauma, and they began to be talked about by my friends. I and most people I know had no idea that that was their reality. While I was experiencing merry time throughout my school years, these friends at the same time were going through hell. How is it that we as a people had no idea? This cruel genocide was happening in my lifetime and for decades previously. Not known, not reported, and First Nations people had no voice. And now the aftermath. What am I to do with this? I understand now the 11 suicides in the 14 months that I lived there. I understand now the drinking. I understand now the abuse I witnessed. I understand now when my friend said she was ashamed to be who she is. I understand now what intergenerational trauma is. I understand now their struggle to regain their dignity by learning their language and traditions. A people raped, pillaged, and made to feel ashamed of whom they are, since colonialism became the standard practice, with no regard for the sacredness of the people encountered. How can a people overcome all of this, and so much done in the name of the church? I witness in my friends' resilience, a deep longing to heal, a slow recovery of traditions, and a slow moving forward into a life of pride and dignity. Some will never make it, though. My artist friend has made great strides in creating a healthy life through healing and forgiveness, while her brother is an addict and a mess, and thus his kids are addicts and a mess. Generational trauma stemming from the residential school experience. My heart aches as I realize the truth of this tragic reality. And yet, in the midst of it all, I was a stranger welcomed. So what next? I knew it was time to leave Long Lac, and so I returned to Mississauga, not sure of what was next. I explored a few leads, and the one that landed was youth worker and assistant at the drop-in in Square One Shopping Centre. 6 months later, the board asked if I would take on the coordinator role. At the ripe old age of 25, this was quite an awesome task and responsibility. From the Long Lac bush to the largest shopping centre in Canada at the time. This drop-in was the brainchild of a Lutheran minister. He took it to the ministerial of which he was a member, and they agreed to support and take responsibility for this effort. A board of directors was formed and staff hired. The purpose and vision was for it to be a compassionate Christian presence in the marketplace. The coordinator role was multifaceted, listening to the drop ins, recruiting and organizing volunteers, public relations to the supporting churches and community at large, visioning and implementing programs, and working with the 12-member board. As I reflect on my gifts and passions, the work checked many of the boxes. Most importantly, listening to people's stories and the freedom to envision and implement program ideas. There are lots of stories to be told from this 10-year experience, many of which continue to inform and inspire my journey. In many ways, it was like a confessional. I heard stories from people of all ages and nationalities, some of which were riveting in their painful realities, like a Filipino aristocrat man who carried the death of a man on his conscience, or the young man who was in such distress and I knew he was going to do something bad. He did. The next day it was he who was charged in a murder. What could I have done? Or another young man who gave himself over to a satanic cult, and his father begged me to help. I was a compassionate presence, but I wonder in retrospect what the hell was I doing in the midst of all of this. I was untrained and ill prepared for dealing with these kinds of stories. I was in over my head, but I did not know I was. But then, maybe like a priest in a confessional, I was to listen and offer forgiving compassion. There are many uplifting and life-giving stories in this mix, like a young developmentally challenged woman who found her way into community through the drop-in programs. And then there were the many from the surrounding corporate community who were so grateful to have found us as they came regularly for a lively game of ping pong on their lunch breaks. When one of the volunteers asked me to go for dinner as she had something to ask of me, I said, sure, not a problem, as I thought I had heard it all. I soon discovered that I had not heard it all. Jay was trans and needed a companion to journey with as she felt her transition to a woman was not working, and she wanted to transition back to male. After pondering this for 24 hours, I agreed, and the next year was filled with our dinners, walks, prayers, and deep listening. All of these experiences opened me to the struggles that so many people carry. God was opening my heart in ever new ways. Having a great relationship with the mall management, I had the freedom to invite choirs, nativity plays, and concerts into the mall itself. There were limitless ways to offer programs, and being a place of warm hospitality. Regular dinner gatherings and Christmas Day dinner for the lonely and disenfranchised were on the menu. In all of this, I was in my element, plotting and visioning, which also included a regular cable TV show and a column in the Mississauga News. So for me, all was amazing, or so it seemed. Why, though, after 10 years, did I find myself hiding under my desk, not wanting to see any of the drop-in clientele? The gift of burnout had visited me. Why a gift? It seemed that being burnt out was an invitation for me to begin to face my inner truths and become real. This would be a process of many years, but the burnout experience propelled me into it. What I see so clearly now from the vantage point of looking back was how unevolved I was. I was totally operating out of my unconscious of unhealed and unresolved issues. I had no boundaries. The need to be needed, the need to be liked, resulting in the inability to speak my truth, were among the motivating guiding forces at work in my modus operandi. There is much about this drop-in experience that was so exhilarating and life-giving, not only for me, but also for many others. However, the divine, it seems, was inviting me to a new inner journey of healing. Were my needs to be met in the outer world of caring for others and trying to be their savior? Or were my needs to be met through a deeply intimate and grounded relationship with God's love and compassion for me? Perhaps both. The latter needed some attention, and burnout was the indicator.